Welcome to Legacy Black of Power. 23 black celebrities who tragically died of AIDS that you didn't know about. You may find this hard to believe, but beneath the glittering lights of showbiz often lie the darkest, most painful truths. In the hidden chapters of American entertainment, there exists a list that has rarely, if ever, been spoken of, a list of black celebrities who lost their lives to AIDS, yet never found the freedom to admit it, not because they lacked courage, but because society gave them no choice. To be black, to be famous, to carry a disease once branded as a sin. It was like living inside 3 circles of hell. They fought in silence, endured in despair, and in the end, many died alone. The 23 stories I'm about to reveal will uncover the truth behind their untold deaths. Stars who dazzled the world under bright lights, but slipped away in the haunting shadows of a secret tied to the disease of the century. Their stories have never been fully told, and I promise you'll be stunned when you discover who they were. Howard Rollins. Howard Rollins. The screen icon who vanished into the shadows, hiding his illness until despair consumed him. Once, he lit up American television, unforgettable as Virgil Tibbs In the Heat of the Night. His commanding presence, quiet strength, and refined talent inspired millions, earning him Emmy and Oscar nods that just cemented a lifelong place at the top. Yet behind the glamour, a tragic truth lingered. On December 8, 1996, Rollins slipped away in a hushed room at St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital in New York. He was just 46. The face that once glowed on screen was pale now, marked by months of unrelenting pain. In the years leading up to his death, he had all but disappeared from Hollywood, retreating to a modest Harlem apartment where he lived in near isolation. When film offers came, he politely declined, citing exhaustion, when in truth he was fighting nightly fevers and infections that tore his body apart. In his final hours, only his mother and sister remained at his bedside, keeping a silent vigil as a small radio played faint, nostalgic melodies. The official cause of death was lymphoma, but the crueler reality was AIDS. Since the mid-1980s, Rollins had carried the secret weight of HIV, the consequence of reckless nights lost to fame, drugs, and Hollywood's endless parties. Sharing needles with friends had unknowingly sealed his fate. For nearly a decade, the virus gnawed away in silence until the symptoms of AIDS exploded in the 1990s, at a time when treatment was little more than a dim hope. Howard Rollins left this world far too soon, a brilliant talent undone by the shadows he could never escape, remembered not just for his roles, but for the tragedy of a life cut short. Raymond St. Jacques. Raymond St. Jacques, the refined icon whose death unveiled a hidden truth. In an era when Hollywood was still steeped in prejudice, Raymond stood out as one of the few black actors to win genuine respect from the industry. With a commanding presence in Cotton Comes to Harlem and beyond, his deep voice, elegant poise, and dignified lifestyle left an unforgettable mark. He lived without scandal, without spectacle, seen by fans and peers alike as the very definition of a gentleman artist. But on August 27, 1990, the curtain quietly fell. St. Jacques was discovered motionless on the sofa of his Los Angeles apartment. A half-finished glass of wine rested on the table. Soft jazz whispered from the stereo. At first, a close friend thought he was simply napping, until silence revealed the truth. Only days earlier, he had turned down a television role, citing nothing more than fevers and exhaustion. Few imagined his health struggles were fatal. In his final months, Raymond withdrew from the world. He rarely answered calls, keeping contact with only a trusted few, spending long hours alone watching old films, revisiting the brilliance of his own journey. Outwardly polished, inwardly ravaged, he carried a secret since the 1970s. He had contracted HIV after fleeting same-sex encounters in Hollywood's hidden corners. Officially, his family requested the cause of death be listed as lymphoma, but doctors knew it was AIDS that had slowly claimed him. He had borne his illness in silence, driven by fear of rejection in a world still cruel to the truth. His funeral was solemn, filled with friends and colleagues who mourned deeply, yet the true story of his suffering remained buried with him. Raymond St. Jacques left behind a legacy of grace and power on screen, but also a haunting reminder of the price of secrets kept too long. Larry Riley. Larry Riley, the rising television star who left too soon, hiding a painful truth behind his warm, unforgettable smile. He first stole hearts as C.J. Memphis in A Soldier's Story and later became a household name in Knots Landing. With those kind eyes, effortless charm, and a gift for making every scene feel real, Riley was a kind of actor who made audiences believe. But behind the glow of television lights, a silent battle was consuming him. On June 6, 1992, Hollywood was shaken when news broke that Riley had passed away at just 39 at Cedars-Sinai Hospital. Only days earlier, he had been struggling to finish his scenes, determined to keep working despite his frail body. That morning, he collapsed at home, gasping for breath. His lungs gave way, and though doctors fought desperately, he never recovered in his final months. The signs were there: violent coughing fits, dramatic weight loss, and exhaustion that clung to him like a shadow. Yet Riley brushed it all off as chronic bronchitis. Even those closest to him were left in the dark. He smiled through the pain, filmed through fatigue, refusing to let his private battle overshadow his public grace. The truth was darker than anyone knew. In the late 1980s, Riley contracted HIV after a brief same-sex encounter, a truth he carried alone during a time when the disease was buried beneath stigma and fear. By 1991, his health began to unravel: pneumonia, relentless weakness, and a body wasting away. Still, he chose silence. At the hospital, his wife and children stood by him, holding his hand as the life slipped from his body. They shielded him with love until his last breath. The official cause of death was AIDS-related complications, but to protect his image, his family kept the truth locked away, preserving for the world the memory of a radiant man whose smile had once lit up America's living rooms. Alvin Ailey, the dance legend who carried his secret to the grave. Alvin Ailey was more than a choreographer. He was a force of nature. As the founder of the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, he didn't just put black dance on the world stage. He transformed it into a language of freedom, struggle, and hope for a generation that had too often been silenced. His work wasn't simply performance. It was testimony, a living cry for dignity and belonging. On December 1st, 1989, the unthinkable happened. At just 58 years old, Alvin Ailey drew his last breath at Lenox Hill Hospital in New York. To those who saw him command his company with the vitality of a man half his age, his sudden decline felt unreal. In truth, the signs had been there. Alone in a modest apartment near his studio, Ailey kept showing up to rehearsals, frail, trembling, fainting on the studio floor, yet still shaping every movement with his unyielding vision. He brushed it off as exhaustion, but his body was quietly collapsing. Even in those final weeks, he scribbled fresh ideas for ballets in his journal. Pages filled with unfinished dreams, abandoned not by choice, but by failing strength. In his last hours, his closest dancers gathered at his bedside, singing softly, retelling stories from the company's early days, as if their voices could tether him to the world a little longer. The official announcement said he died of a blood disorder, but when the truth emerged, it rocked the art world. Alvin Ailey had succumbed to complications from AIDS. He had contracted HIV during New York's freewheeling party scene of the 1970s, long before the world understood the virus or the devastation it would bring. In an era when HIV was whispered about, if spoken of at all, Ailey chose silence. Perhaps he feared the crushing stigma. Perhaps he wanted history to remember him for his brilliance, not his illness. Yet the truth could not be hidden forever. Behind the curtain of genius, Alvin Ailey bore a secret as heavy as his legacy. And though his body fell, his art remains. Dance is still alive with the pulse of freedom, beauty, and truth. Max Robinson, the TV legend silenced by a disease no one dared to name. Max Robinson wasn't just another face on television. He was a trailblazer. As the first black anchor of ABC World News Tonight, he shattered barriers, commanding the trust of millions of Americans who tuned in to hear his voice each evening. He was confidence, charisma, and history in motion. But on December 20th, 1988, that voice was silenced. Robinson collapsed inside a cafe near his home and was rushed to Howard University Hospital. Feverish, gasping for breath, with searing chest pain, he fought for life as doctors struggled to stabilize him. Hours later, he was gone. Officially, the cause was pneumonia. To the public, the loss was sudden, unthinkable. How could a man so vibrant disappear so quickly? The truth, however, was far more devastating. Robinson had been living with AIDS. Doctors later concluded he likely contracted HIV from an untested blood transfusion in 1983 after a car accident. Back then, screening protocols were dangerously lax. From that moment, the disease quietly ravaged him, stripping away his health and, ultimately, his career. In his final years, Robinson retreated from the spotlight. No more broadcasts, no more interviews, just the quiet isolation of a small apartment. When asked why, he said he was resting. In reality, he was hiding from a society gripped by fear and prejudice, where an HIV diagnosis was as much a social sentence as it was a medical one. His once strong body withered, his proud voice weakened. The only comfort he asked for in his last moments was a stack of Black history books, brought by his ex-wife and children, reminders of the legacy he carried. Max Robinson's death shook the media world not only because he was a pioneer, but because of what it revealed. That even icons could be consumed by the HIV/AIDS epidemic, a crisis that carried unbearable stigma. He chose silence over pity, dignity over confession. In the end, his passing was not just a loss of a legend, but a haunting reminder of an epidemic America was still too afraid to name. Bobby DeBarge, the prodigy silenced by a disease that haunted a generation. Bobby DeBarge was the fragile soul behind the legendary R&B family group, DeBarge, an icon of the 1980s. With his piercing falsetto, magnetic stage presence, and raw songwriting genius, he climbed to the top of show business. Hits like I Like It and All This Love poured out of radios across America, making Bobby a voice you couldn't forget. But the glitter of the spotlight couldn't shield him from the shadows closing in. Addiction dragged him into the abyss, and a disease that terrified the world tightened its grip. On August 16, 1995, in a Grand Rapids hospital, Bobby took his final breath at just 39 years old. His once beautiful body was ravaged, gaunt, pale, covered in sores. He was unrecognizable, a haunting shell of the star who once lit up arenas. In his last years, Bobby lived quietly in a rundown rental, cut off from the music world, from friends, even from the fans who once adored him. The R&B angel had vanished. Still, he tried to fight his way back. He carried notebooks of unfinished lyrics, scraps of melodies, but pain always stole his strength. Family members remembered him sitting in silence, replaying old tracks like I Like It, his eyes distant, clinging to a golden past that would never return. The secret he carried was unbearable. Bobby had contracted HIV during the 1980s. The same years he soared to fame, the same years he fell deeper into heroin. In the haze of all-night parties in Los Angeles, he shared a needle with a close friend. That single act sealed his fate. When he learned of his illness, Bobby withdrew from the world, not out of shame, but out of fear. Fear of harming the people he loved most. His family kept the truth hidden to protect his image, but rumors spread, and eventually the world knew. AIDS took Bobby DeBarge, but the cruelest cut was the silence of the industry that once celebrated him. He didn't just die from disease. He died from isolation, from a stage gone dark, from a world that turned its back. Bobby's voice may have been silenced, but his falsetto still echoes, a reminder of both brilliance and tragedy. Willie Smith, the fashion legend lost in the shadow of a deadly disease. Willie Smith was more than a designer. He was a force who reshaped fashion. As the founder of Willie Wear, he pioneered a groundbreaking mix of street style and modern sophistication, crafting a look that was both accessible and revolutionary. With golden hands and a fearless eye for aesthetics, he became one of America's most celebrated black fashion icons, leaving his mark on runways from New York to Paris and London. But behind the glitter and acclaim, his story took a tragic turn. In April 1987, just days after returning from a trip to India, Smith was rushed to a New York hospital, plagued by relentless fevers, a hacking cough, and a body that was failing him. The man who once threw glittering Manhattan parties for celebrities and tastemakers now withdrew from public life, avoiding gatherings and refusing visits. Friends noticed his frail frame, his pale complexion, his weary face. When questioned, he waved off concerns, blaming it on infection from his travels. The truth was far heavier. In an era when the world barely understood AIDS, Smith had contracted HIV amid the excess and secrecy of the 1980s. In his hospital room, friends brought him sketches and fabric swatches, hoping to spark his spirit. But no miracle came. On April 17, 1987, at just 39 years old, Willie Smith breathed his last. Official records listed pneumonia, but those closest to him knew it was a cruel veil of a disease the world feared to name. His passing sent shockwaves to the fashion industry. A brilliant light extinguished too soon, raising haunting questions about the silence surrounding AIDS and its devastating toll on the arts. Yet, even in death, Smith was not erased. His designs continued to inspire, proof that while the century's disease cast its shadow, it could never eclipse his brilliance. Essex Hemphill, the poet who left his pages unfinished. Essex Hemphill was more than a poet. He was a fighter, a voice that cut through silence with raw honesty, a towering figure in America's black arts community. He refused to let the world look away from injustice. His words, sharp and unflinching, gave rhythm to the struggles of black and LGBTQ+ lives, especially during the darkest years of the AIDS epidemic. His verses found their way into major anthologies, ensuring his voice would echo far beyond his time. But behind the brilliance was a man quietly battling a storm. On November 4th, 1995, in his cramped Washington, D.C. apartment, Hemphill was found unconscious. No more breath, no more clatter of his typewriter. Only scattered manuscripts, half-finished poems, and stories that would never find their endings. For months, Essex had endured raging fevers, infections, and relentless exhaustion, yet he chose silence. He turned down hospitalization, unwilling to die in a sterile white room. Instead, he stayed in the one place that still felt like freedom, his tiny apartment, surrounded by the words that defined him. His tragedy had roots years earlier. In the late 1980s, during a long-term relationship with another gay writer, Essex unknowingly contracted HIV. At the time, the truth about the virus was suppressed in many black communities, leaving people vulnerable and unprotected. They loved, they lived, unaware of the dangers shadowing them. By 1993, when dark lesions appeared on his skin, Essex finally learned the truth. He had AIDS. Just 2 years later, at only 38 years old, the world lost him. A brilliant talent silenced too soon, leaving behind not only a painful void in literature, but also a reminder of the voices erased by fear and neglect. And in the room where he took his final breath, silence swallowed everything. The typewriter, the laughter, the rage, leaving only unfinished words, like whispers still searching for an ending. Marlon Riggs, the fearless filmmaker who carried the century's cruelest disease in silence until his final breath. Marlon Riggs was no ordinary director. He was a revolutionary voice, one of the boldest documentarians in American history. Through works like Tongues Untied, he tore open the nation's silence, forcing America to hear the pain and pride of black and gay communities long buried in the shadows. To his students at UC Berkeley, he was more than an educator. He was a warrior for truth, a man who carried convictions with brilliance and grace. Yet even warriors bleed. Behind his radiant smile, Riggs was fighting a private war with a disease the world had branded with stigma and fear. In 1991, after months of fatigue, fevers, and immune collapse, he learned the truth. HIV, the virus, likely came from a fleeting love in the 1980s, a time when AIDS was a mystery whispered about in shame. He never announced it, never sought pity. Instead, he kept teaching, editing, and lecturing, even as sarcomas spread across his arms, and every breath became a battle. By April 1994, his body had nearly surrendered. Pneumocystis pneumonia ravaged his lungs, dragging him into an Oakland hospital bed. Few knew the truth, not his colleagues, not even most of his students. To them, he was still the vibrant professor with the unbreakable smile. But in private, he was racing against time. From that hospital bed, surrounded by film reels and scattered notes, Riggs poured his fading strength into what would become his masterpiece, Black Is, Black Ain't. Friends and collaborators carried footage in and out of his room, fueling the flame of a man who refused to let disease silence him. On April 5, 1994, Marlon Riggs drew his last breath. By his bedside, his camera remained silent, loyal, and unblinking. a witness to a man who turned suffering into art and who fought until the very end to give his people a voice the world could never again ignore. Alan Wiggins, the baseball star lost in an HIV storm. Alan Wiggins once blazed across American baseball like a comet. With breathtaking speed, flawless instincts, and a fiery determination, he wore the jerseys of San Diego Padres and the Baltimore Orioles, two MLB powerhouses. Fans believed he was destined to become a legend, but behind the cheers and flashing lights, his life was slowly unraveling in ways no one could imagine. In 1991, at just 33 years old, Wiggins passed away in a Baltimore hospital. His decline was swift and cruel. Days of relentless fever and raging infections had left him so weak he could no longer stand. Before that, he had lived quietly in a rented suburban home, far from the headlines that once praised him. No more contracts, no more titles, just a man coughing up blood, clinging to belief that rest alone could heal him. But inside his body, a hidden storm raged. Since the 1980s, Wiggins had unknowingly carried HIV. The tragic result of heavy drug use that followed injuries and crushing pressure to perform. At one after-game party, he had shared needles with teammates, unaware of the silent danger passing between them. In a world where recklessness and party culture overshadowed caution, fate dealt him a devastating blow. By the time he finally learned the truth, it was already too late. In his final days, his mother and brother sat at his bedside, bringing old photographs of him in uniform, desperate to remind him of the glory he once knew. Soon after, doctors confirmed what whispers had already suggested. Complications from AIDS had claimed him. His family begged for silence, but the truth, as always, could not remain buried. Alan Wiggins' story remains one of baseball's most haunting tragedies. The tale of a brilliant star extinguished far too soon by a storm no one was prepared to face. Glenn Burke, the man who gave the world a high five, should have been remembered as a baseball hero. In the late 1970s, he lit up the stadiums for the Los Angeles Dodgers and the Oakland Athletics, carrying all the promise of a rising star. But that brilliant light was dimmed far too soon, extinguished by prejudice and the unforgiving stigma of his time. After becoming the first major league player to openly live as a gay man, Burke was cast aside. Contracts vanished, friendships dissolved, and even family ties grew cold. With no safety net, he drifted from place to place, surviving in shabby boarding houses, often found near Candlestick Park, staring silently at the arena that once roared his name. His dream of returning to the game he loved was met only with closed doors and indifference as his health steadily declined. On May 30th, 1995, Glenn Burke's body was discovered in a crumbling San Francisco boarding room. He was just 42, wasted away by AIDS, his chest and legs scarred by the cruel marks of Kaposi sarcoma. Gone was the vibrant black athlete who once embodied joy and strength. In his place lay a man abandoned by the sport he helped change. Burke had unknowingly contracted HIV years earlier in San Francisco's Castro district, where he sought freedom but found tragedy. In his final days, only a handful of old friends from the LGBTQ+ community brought him food and kindness. Even they trembled when doctors revealed the cause of his death. The epidemic still cloaked in fear and silence. Glenn Burke passed without fanfare, without family by his side, but his death became more than just an ending. It was a harsh reminder of a sport that turned its back on difference, and a community forced to fight not only for dignity, but for survival. Ron Richardson, the silent exit of Broadway's golden voice in the shadow of AIDS. Ron Richardson was more than a Broadway star. He was a force, with a voice as deep and stirring as the Mississippi itself. He brought audiences to their feet and won a Tony Award for his unforgettable role as Jim in Big River. He carried the pride of black musical theater on his shoulders, shining as one of its brightest lights. But on April 5th, 1995, the curtain fell too soon. At just 43 years old, Richardson died in a Bronx hospital after a long, hidden battle with AIDS. When he was admitted, his body was already ravaged, covered with Kaposi sarcoma, the unmistakable scars of the disease's cruel final stage. Even as his health collapsed, he refused to let go of the stage. Just a year earlier, he was still rehearsing, forcing his weakened body through songs and scripts insisting that theater remain his lifeline. He brushed off the shortness of breath, the fatigue, the pain, telling others it was only stress. But his family knew the truth. Since 1993, he had been fading quietly, carrying a burden he dared not share. No one ever knew exactly when he contracted HIV, likely in the early 1980s through discreet same-sex relationships. In an industry already fraught with stigma, silence became his only defense. So he bore alone, the stage lights masking the shadows inside him. At the moment of his passing, an open script lay on his bedside table, with big river posters pinned to the wall. Proof that he was still holding on, still dreaming of one more performance. Ron Richardson never truly left the stage. He only slipped into silence, leaving behind a voice that Broadway will never forget. Kevin Peter Hall, the giant behind the mask and his mysterious death. At just 35, Kevin Peter Hall was unlike anyone Hollywood had ever seen. Standing an astonishing 7 feet 2 inches tall, he brought unforgettable monsters to life, most famously the Predator and the gentle Bigfoot in Harry and the Hendersons. While his face was rarely recognized, his towering presence became the beating heart of 1980 sci-fi blockbusters. In 1991, after what seemed like a minor car accident, Kevin was admitted to the hospital. Doctors expected full recovery, but instead, his health spiraled downward. Relentless fevers, crippling pneumonia, and a failing immune system left everyone baffled. Then came the devastating truth. Speculation swirled until physicians quietly concluded he had likely contracted HIV from a contaminated blood transfusion a year before, when gaps in U.S. screening still left patients vulnerable. For months, Kevin had brushed off a nagging cough, believing it was nothing more than a stubborn cold. But on April 10th, 1991, his battle ended. He took his last breath in his wife's arms, a family photo resting at his bedside. Officially, the cause was never broadcast, but whispers from hospital staff revealed the truth. Kevin Peter Hall had died of AIDS at only 35. It was a shattering end for a gentle giant, an unsung star forever hidden behind Hollywood's most fearsome masks. Sylvester, the disco legend who left in a room of light. Sylvester, the unforgettable voice behind You Make Me Feel Mighty Real. Wasn't just a singer, he was a blazing icon of disco and a fearless trailblazer for the LGBTQ+ community. With his flamboyant style, electrifying stage presence, and a voice that could lift hearts straight to the heavens, he made the world dance under glittering lights. But on December 16, 1988, silence fell. In his San Francisco apartment, where music once roared and laughter never seemed to fade, Sylvester was found lying motionless on his bed. Posters of his past glories still covered the walls, and a record kept spinning on the turntable, as if unwilling to let go. His best friend and manager wept at his side, crushed by the loss. Just months earlier, Sylvester had taken the stage draped in silk scarves and dazzling makeup, concealing the darkened skin and Kaposi sarcoma that betrayed his battle. To the public, he brushed it off as just a flu, but those closest to him knew the truth. Since 1985, he had lived with HIV, an unspoken shadow of San Francisco's vibrant club years. Even then, he never complained. He faced the illness with quiet dignity, choosing joy in music over despair. The weekend before his passing, friends gathered at his apartment, sensing the inevitable. They sang his disco anthems while he lay there smiling faintly, his spirit still glowing. Days later, Sylvester slipped away, leaving behind a silence as piercing as his music had once been radiant. He was only 41. To this day, the dance floor remembers him, not as a man who lost, but as one who lived brilliantly, defiantly, and mighty real. Jermaine Stewart, the silent battle behind the music. Jermaine Stewart electrified the world in the 1980s with his anthem, We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off. His sharp style, fiery stage presence, and unmistakable voice made him one of R&B's unforgettable icons. But behind the spotlight, a far crueler story was unfolding. By the mid-1990s, Jermaine had vanished from the big stages. He retreated into a small South Side Chicago apartment, rarely seen, his once vibrant life reduced to quiet shadows. Friends whispered the word no one dared say aloud, AIDS. By 1995, the symptoms could no longer be hidden. He canceled shows, fainted in studios, and drifted into long silences, haunted by memories of glittering nights in Los Angeles and New York. The parties, the fleeting romances, and the unprotected moments that left him carrying a deadly secret. On March 17, 1997, Jermaine's brilliant flame went out inside a Chicago hospital. His body was frail, his skin ashen, his once sparkling eyes dimmed by the pain of liver failure. At his bedside, his mother wept as she watched her son, still so young, slip away to the world. His illness remained a mystery, but to those closest to him, it was a truth they had long carried in silence. Jermaine Stewart left behind music that still pulses with life, even as his own was stolen too soon by the harshest toll of all. Fonce Mizell, the music maestro's sudden death in the studio, and a shocking truth. Fonce Mizell was a quiet genius behind some of the greatest soul and funk anthems of the 1970s, shaping the very heartbeat of Motown through collaborations with the Jackson 5, Marvin Gaye, and Smokey Robinson. But on July 15, 1989, tragedy struck. His brother discovered him lifeless on the floor of his Los Angeles home studio, his body cold, a mixing board still humming, and cassette tapes scattered like unfinished thoughts. In the months leading up to his death, Fonce had battled fatigue, joint pain, and relentless fevers, brushing it off as stress from long nights in studio. The truth, however, was far darker. He had contracted HIV, a secret even to himself, until the illness began ravaging his body with exhaustion and severe weight loss. Those closest to him whispered that the virus was unknowingly passed to him by his partner, a singer with a turbulent past marked by drugs. In an era when AIDS was still shrouded in fear and stigma, Mizell hid his suffering and worked himself to the edge, spending his last nights replaying old recordings in search of one final masterpiece. His death was reported as a result of a prolonged illness, but within the music world, hushed conversations told another story. The story of a visionary whose life and dreams were cut short by a truth too painful for the industry to face. Hank Gathers, the young star who fell on the court. Hank Gathers was more than just a college basketball player. He was a phenomenon. The Loyola Marymount star had the kind of explosive athleticism and raw skill that had NBA scouts already whispering about his future greatness. But on March 4th, 1990, inside Gerson Pavilion, his rising dream came crashing down. After a thunderous dunk that electrified the crowd, Hank suddenly collapsed mid-game. In an instant, the roaring cheers turned into stunned silence. He was rushed to the sidelines, but within minutes, his heart stopped. At just 23 years old, the promise of a legendary career was gone. For weeks leading up to that night, Hank had complained of chest pains and shortness of breath during practices. But he refused to sit out. He was determined to play, to shine, to seize the opportunity he had worked his whole life for. Official reports listed a heart arrhythmia as the cause, but whispers of something darker followed him long after his death. Close friends claimed Hank had discovered months earlier that he was HIV positive. Terrified of the stigma and unwilling to jeopardize his career, he kept it secret. Behind closed doors, he struggled, quietly taking medication, gasping for air during final practices, his once unstoppable body beginning to betray him. The truth may never be fully known. What remains is a haunting image of a young man at the height of his dreams, taken too soon by the cruelest of twists. A talent buried not just by illness, but by the silence and secrecy of a time when some battles could not be fought in the open. Willie Hutch, the Motown genius's tragic finale. Willie Hutch was more than a songwriter. He was a heartbeat behind some of Motown's most unforgettable moments. From crafting the Foxy Brown soundtrack to penning gems from Marvin Gaye and the Jackson 5, his genius echoed through every soulful note. Yet behind the music, a silent storm was brewing. On September 19, 1992, Hutch drew his last breath in a Dallas hospital, his body ravaged by pneumonia. For more than a year, he had kept up a brave front, still scribbling lyrics and strumming his guitar inside his modest Dallas home, concealing his weakening body behind a mask of strength. Few knew that the true enemy wasn't just pneumonia, it was AIDS. The truth emerged only later. In 1991, after months of coughing fits, shortness of breath, and fatigue, doctors discovered HIV. Many around him believed he was battling nothing more than chronic pneumonia, but the reality was far crueler. Years earlier, during the wild nights of 1970s Los Angeles, Hutch had indulged in the alcohol-soaked, one-night flings that were part of the entertainment world's darker side. It was likely that the seed of tragedy was planted. In his final days, family and close friends tried to surround him with the music he loved most. They placed old recordings by his bedside and even laid a guitar within arm's reach, a silent reminder of the brilliance that once poured from his soul. Official reports listed pneumonia as the cause of death, but those closest to him carried the heavier truth. Willie Hutch, a man whose music once uplifted millions, had been quietly destroyed by AIDS. Melvin Franklin, the Temptations' deep voice and a haunting end beyond the spotlight. Melvin Franklin was more than just a legendary bass of the Temptations. His voice helped shape the golden sound of Motown, carrying classics like My Girl and Papa was a rolling stone into music history. But behind the harmony and applause, Franklin's final years were marked by silence and struggle. On February 23, 1995, the music world was shaken when he passed away at Cedars-Sinai Hospital. Official reports said he died from complications following a stroke, yet the truth was far more devastating. For nearly 2 years, Franklin had withdrawn to his Baldwin Hills home, fighting constant infections, unexplainable weight loss, and blinding headaches. He told friends it was just high blood pressure. In reality, the shadows of something much darker haunted him. His family later confirmed what Franklin himself had kept hidden since the late 1980s. He had contracted HIV during fleeting encounters. By 1993, he knew the diagnosis. Fear, exhaustion, and the crushing stigma of the time forced him to keep it locked away, even as his health collapsed. Though medical records listed brain failure as the cause, those closest to him knew the cruel truth. AIDS had ravaged him long before the stroke. The bass voice that once rumbled with unmatched power fell silent, leaving the world with timeless songs, but also with a haunting memory of a man destroyed by secrets he could never share. Orish Grinstead, the 702 star who was gone too soon. Orish Grinstead was more than just a pretty face in the R&B world. She was one of the founding voices behind the girl group 702, carrying a natural sweetness and a sharp musical identity far beyond her years. But behind her smile, fate had already set a tragic course. On April 20th, 2008, at just 28 years old, Orish took her final breath in a Las Vegas hospital. She had been admitted in critical condition, battling high fevers, severe weight loss, and strange bruises that doctors later traced to Kaposi sarcoma, a cancer often linked to AIDS. Whispers soon surfaced that her story went back to 1993. At just 13, after a minor surgery following an accident, Orish allegedly received a tainted blood transfusion, blood that carried the deadly HIV virus. For years, she lived in silence, quietly shouldering the burden. By the time her health collapsed, she told friends it was only anemia. Her sisters in 702 thought she was simply tired, never suspecting the truth. She was in the final stage of AIDS. In her last days, Orish was bedridden, frail, yet still surrounded by music. With headphones pressed to her ears and a journal by her side, she scribbled her dreams of the stage, clinging to the rhythm that had once lifted her into stardom. At just 28, her life was stolen by a cruel twist of fate, leaving fans stunned, her sisters grieving, and the world robbed of a voice that might have soared for decades more. Eazy-E, the godfather of gangster rap, was gone in the blink of an eye, claimed by AIDS. The man who built Ruthless Records and pushed NWA to the top of the charts in the late 80s was suddenly fighting for his life. In March 1995, the hip-hop world froze when news broke that he collapsed in the studio and was rushed to the hospital. Doctors revealed the brutal truth. His lungs ravaged by pneumonia, his immune system shattered. The final diagnosis, end-stage AIDS. Just weeks earlier, he had been full of energy, cruising the streets of Compton. Now he lay in a Cedars-Sinai hospital bed. Too weak to walk, his once powerful voice reduced to faint whispers. The cause was no secret. An unprotected, wild love life during rap's golden age had left him exposed. By the time he found out, it was too late. One by one, his NWA brothers came to his bedside, sharing memories of their rise from nothing to legends. Eazy could only nod, unable to join the laughter. On March 26, 1995, at just 30 years old, he drew his final breath. A Compton cap rested on his chest, a symbol of a generation that he helped shape. His sudden death sent shockwaves to the rap community, a chilling wake-up call about HIV and AIDS that no one in hip-hop could ignore. David Peaston, the silent disease that stole a golden voice. David Peaston once lit up the world with a voice so powerful it felt heaven-sent. He stole hearts with his soulful ballad Two Wrongs Don't Make a Right and earned a Soul Train Music Award, a star seemingly destined for greatness. But on February 1st, 2012, that golden voice fell silent forever. His sister found him lifeless in his St. Louis bedroom. No more piano, no more songs, only an open Bible and unfinished sheet music lying beside him, a haunting picture of a man whose story ended too soon. In his later years, David kept to himself, performing quietly in church halls. Few knew the real struggle he was hiding. Since 2011, his body had changed drastically. Severe weight loss, constant fatigue, unhealing skin sores. He told the world it was diabetes. But those closest to him whispered of something darker. The truth was merciless. In the late 1990s, David contracted HIV during a relationship with a fellow singer whose life was consumed by drugs and wild parties. By the time he discovered it, it was far too late. As the disease advanced, he withdrew into his room, where family prayed by his side, but David could no longer answer. Officially, his death was recorded as a prolonged illness. Insiders, however, revealed the truth. AIDS had stolen one of the most extraordinary voices of his generation. The cruelest part of secrets like these is that they don't just claim a life. They silence a voice, leaving behind questions, rumors, and a legacy clouded in shadows. These were once shining stars, icons who stood in the brightest spotlight. Yet so many faded quietly, their truths hidden even in death. Of the 23 names we've shared today, whose story shook you the most? Did any make you reflect on your own youth? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your feelings. And if you want to keep uncovering the untold corners of celebrity lives, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next truth revealed just might change the way you see your idols forever.